I love the Old Testament. I think I said that last time I did a devotional, but I'm just saying it again. I love the Old Testament because I learn something new every single time I read it. And today I want to share with you some other things I've seen when reading Exodus. In Exodus 14, we find a story that we all know and love, and if you don't, let me just tell you, this is a story we all know and love, and it's the story of the splitting of the Red Sea. The Israelites found themselves in captivity for a very long time, for 430 years, and finally they get told that they're going to be saved, that God is rescuing them from captivity, and not only is he rescuing them from oppression, but he's taking them to a land that's going to be called their own. They're going to finally have a home. And so God promises to rescue them, and they're like, yay, we'll believe it when we see it. And so the plagues happen, and they see God moving, and finally Egypt says, go away, escape, go. So Moses and the Israelites leave, and they approach the Red Sea with Egypt changing their mind and chasing after them. And so we see that the Israelites approach the Red Sea. Moses and the Israelites are standing at the Red Sea. There's a sea in front of them. They can't escape. And now Egypt is closing in on them from behind, and the sea is on the other side. They're probably thinking, oh, this is a bad situation. God has failed us. He said he was going to rescue us, and no, he didn't. And they even said that in Exodus 14. But God is saying, wait, hold up. I'm going to rescue you. Watch me work. And I think this is so cool. In verse 15, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the waters so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his troops, his chariots, and his charioteers. When my glory is displayed through them, all Egypt will see my glory and know that I am the Lord. Then the angel of God, who had been leading the people of Israel, moved to the rear of the camp. The pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them. The cloud settled between the Egyptian and Israelite camps. As darkness fell, the cloud turned to fire, lighting up the night. But the Egyptians and Israelites did not approach each other all night. What's really cool is in Exodus, and really when Israel is wandering throughout into the wilderness, God is appearing to them as fire and a cloud of smoke. And so the Israelites are following this cloud so that they can be led out of Egypt into their promised land. And so they're reminded that God's presence is always with them, because there's this cloud of smoke just floating around, and that's God showing them that he's with them. And they're panicking. They're in this terrible situation. They're literally they're not literally. They're in between a rock and a hard place, a sea and an army. So it's not a great situation. It looks impossible. And then God says, what are you doing? Just pick up the staff and split the sea. Like, it's no big deal. But to God, it is no big deal. It's not a big deal because God can do that. And I'm thinking, as an Israelite, I'm hearing these words. And before that, Moses had said, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. As an Israelite, I'm probably thinking, that sounds impossible. We're going to die. God has left us. This is a joke. We were free for like 10 seconds, and now we're going to die because Egypt's right there. Now this cloud of smoke it becomes fire, and there's fire in between Egypt and the Israelites. So God is providing protection to the Israelites from Egypt. Moses looks at the sea, lifts up his staff, and the sea starts to split overnight. It didn't happen instantly. It happened over time, and it happened from the other side coming in. So it probably looked to the Israelites that nothing was happening. But all night the wind was moving and the water was splitting until finally the Israelites could see, oh my gosh, the sea is split. We get to walk through it. But it took time for them to actually see it because it took time for it to happen. So finally, if you know the story, They if you don't know the story, they pass through the sea closes up, swallows up the Egyptians that were following them, and they're able to experience freedom once finally after so long. But I want to go back and point out that it didn't happen instantly. The splitting of the sea wasn't something instantaneous that happened as soon as Moses asked God to do it. It took time. It was frightening for them. They were looking at the army right behind them, getting ready to kill them. And God was the only separation between that army and them. And then they were looking at the sea that wasn't splitting right away. It was just there in front of them, blocking them from their freedom. But eventually, the entire time God was moving. It's just they weren't seeing it. But God was splitting the sea from east to west. He was splitting the sea, and eventually they were able to walk through it. What I want to point out, first of all, it's cool that God is just this pillar of cloud that moves behind them. Just paint this picture. The Egyptian army is coming up and approaching them. Danger is coming and approaching the Israelites. So this pillar of this cloud comes and stays in between the Israelites and the Egyptian army and lights up as fire and protects them. God provided them protection in their situation while they were waiting. He provided protection. That's awesome to me, because I think in the midst of our waiting, God is providing protection too. But it's still a scary situation, because the Israelites could still see Egypt from the other side. Egypt was just a fire away. They were right there. So they had no idea if the fire was going to sustain itself all night. It did, obviously, because it's God. They had no idea. It could have gone out and then they would have died. But it didn't. God had protected them the entire night until the sea was finally split. Another thing is God always provides a way, even if it takes time to get there. The Israelites were promised freedom. They were promised a new home, and God delivered on that promise. But the journey didn't look the same, or didn't quite look at what Israel imagined. They probably didn't imagine a sea being in front of them and not being able to cross it. Well, they probably didn't imagine being able to cross it because it was split for them. But God works in mysterious ways, and that was one of the ways. I love this story because it reminds me that even when it feels like nothing's happening, God is splitting the sea. God is moving. God is working. And I'll be honest with you, right now, sometimes it feels like chaos is just reigning, or things are just getting worse and worse by the minute. Sometimes it feels like God is not really in control. It feels like things are going completely out of control. Sometimes it feels like there's a sea in front of us and there's no way to cross it. And there's a sea in front of us and an army waiting to kill us behind us. But God's been in that situation too, and he got the Israelites where they needed to go. He was able to give them their freedom. Right now, it feels like there's a lot of chaos, yes. But God is splitting the sea, and we're going to be able to walk through it. My encouragement to you is what Moses said to the people of Israel. Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. Stand still. Moses doesn't tell the Israelites, all right, guys, while we're waiting, throw every rock you can, or make your own weapons, because we don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if this is going to work. So be ready. If you can train overnight, if you can pull a Mulan, do it, because we don't know if we're going to be able to, if God is going to rescue us, if we're going to be on our own. No, he says, just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you. I don't think we're very good at standing still. I think when this quarantine happened and we had to stand still, it was very hard. I think for us, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of things going wrong, we have a tendency to want to do something about it, to want to just panic. But there are times when we do need to step up, rise up and do something. But then there are times where we need to stand still and watch, because we need to watch God perform the miracle. Maybe because God needs to show us what faith looks like. Maybe it's because God needs to give us this huge miracle to show the world something. I lose faith sometimes. And I'm not going to lie to you, sometimes I've wondered if God can get us out of this whole situation right now. The state of our country, the state of the world, really. Everything that we're going through. 2020 in itself is a hard year. 2020 in itself feels like a rock in a hard place. But I need to remember that there have been many battles in the Old Testament where it looked impossible, where there were 300 versus thousands and thousands more in the 301, where God made the sun stand still so that Israel could win the battle, where God led worship leaders into battle only to find that the battle had been won before they ever got there, where a sea that needed to be split was split and they could walk through unharmed, safely, reaching the other side. But they had no part of it. They didn't have any part in splitting the sea. It's not like they took shovels and started getting the water out of the ocean. They just had to stand still and watch. And right now I feel like we need to do more standing still and watching. And I would even add listening to the little movements of the water being split. We're doing a lot of talking. We're doing a lot of doing because we're panicking. At least sometimes it feels like we're panicking. And we're not standing still and watching at how God is going to use all of this to bring more glory. I think we need to just stand still and watch God rescue us from today. Stand still and watch. We need rescuing, definitely. We need a sea split in front of us. And I think God is doing it. It's not instantaneous. It takes time. But eventually we'll see that the sea has been split and we'll be able to walk through. God is going to get us through it, but we just have to hold on to faith, stand still, and watch God rescue us. So my encouragement for you today is, if you need to see the sea split, be patient, because sometimes it's not instantaneous. It takes time. If you need encouragement, know that God has been doing this for a very long time. He's been in the rescuing business for way longer than you've been alive. He's done it before. He can do it again. If you need hope, know that Israel didn't stay in Egypt. They ended up going on and building their nation because God led them to their land. The story gets complicated, but eventually God got them there. If you need rescuing today, know that God is working on it. All we have to do is stand still and watch. And maybe that's what you need to hear today. That's what I need to hear. We just need to stand still and watch, because God is working. We just need to pay attention. Thanks, guys.